His body went still, his spirit leaving him as he fell to the ground at the entrance, lifeless. Once upon a time, in the heart of a bustling West African town lived a woman named Madame Nuru, known for her wealth, beauty, and charm that drew men in like moths to a flame. She was a mystery in every way. No one knew how she had gained her fortune or why men who visited her never returned. Men in town spoke of her with both desire and fear, claiming she had eyes that could enchant and words that could melt iron. Yet, whispers traveled quietly, Madame Nuru was dangerous. Those who entered her world often disappeared. Madame Nuru lived in a grand mansion on the hill, surrounded by high walls and guarded gates. Each evening, she would dress in flowing robes of deep crimson or emerald, with heavy jewelry that glistened in the moonlight. Her voice was smooth as honey, and with a single glance, she could make a man forget his own name. Men who were enchanted by her beauty never saw the darkness in her smile. She would often appear at the town's most luxurious gatherings, her presence filling the room with an aura both inviting and unnerving. She would speak to a man, listen to his dreams, and then invite him to her home for a private meeting. The men, blinded by her charm, followed her willingly, believing they were about to share in her secret world. But those who entered her home never left. Their friends and family searched but found no trace, only rumors and silence. In time, the town grew fearful, but one man, named Kofi, became curious. He had watched Madame Nuru closely, noticing the pattern of disappearances and the strange looks she gave to certain men. Kofi decided to uncover her secret, no matter the risk. One night, Kofi followed her as she left a gathering, her latest guest in tow. He kept his distance, careful not to be seen, and when she entered her mansion with the man, he watched from the shadows, determined to find a way in. Hours passed, and the light in her mansion faded until all was dark. Kofi saw his chance and slipped through a side entrance, moving carefully through the lavish but silent hallways. The mansion felt strange, cold, and heavy, as if the air itself carried secrets. Finally, he found a hidden door at the end of a hallway. It was ajar, and as he entered, he felt a chill run down his spine. The room before him was dimly lit, with walls lined with heavy drapes, and the air smelled of incense and something rotten. In the center of the room stood a large wooden doll, grotesque and eerie, with hollow eyes and a mouth twisted in a disturbing smile. Kofi's heart pounded as he stepped closer, realizing that the doll was not just a decoration. Around its neck and arms hung necklaces, bracelets, and rings, men's jewelry. In a sudden flash, he understood. Madame Nuru's wealth was no mystery, it was the treasure of those she lured to her home. She had devoured their manhoods, stealing their vitality and leaving their lifeless bodies to rot, hidden behind the walls of her mansion. The doll was her trophy, holding pieces of every man she had ensnared. Kofi heard a faint creak behind him. He turned, and there stood Madame Nuru, her eyes glinting in the dim light, her lips curled in a cruel smile. She moved towards him, whispering ancient words, her hands reaching out as shadows seemed to wrap around him. But Kofi was prepared. He took a charm from his pocket, one that an elder had given him, the charm meant to protect against dark magic. As he held it up, Madame Nuru recoiled, hissing like a serpent. In that moment, Kofi fled, bursting from the mansion and down the hill, vowing never to speak of what he had seen. But the town knew. They saw his fear, his silence, and the truth spread in whispers once more. And Madame Nuru's mansion remained on the hill, silent and dark, waiting for the next man who would dare to enter her web of shadows. Kofi's encounter with Madame Nuru left him haunted. He could still feel the chill of her gaze, the twisted, hollow eyes of the doll watching him, and the memory of those ancient whispers echoed in his mind. But more than fear, he felt anger. How many lives had she destroyed? How many families had suffered without knowing what happened to their sons, brothers, and fathers? The thought ignited a fierce determination in him. He had to bring her down, no matter the risk. When Kofi returned to the village, he gathered the elders and some trusted friends. He shared everything he had seen and heard. The elders listened, their faces darkening as they realized the extent of Madame Nuru's crimes. They knew it would not be easy. Madame Nuru was both powerful and cunning, and her wealth gave her influence over many. But Kofi's story fueled the villagers' anger and resolve. They decided to plan an attack on Madame Nuru, to put an end to her dark magic and bring justice to those who had disappeared. They planned in secret, meeting late at night by the riverside to avoid being seen. They would storm her mansion, seize her, and destroy the doll that held the souls of the missing men. But unknown to them, someone among them was not as loyal as they thought. One of the younger men, Temi, was in awe of Madame Nuru's wealth and power. He had always dreamed of a life of luxury, and he saw an opportunity to gain her favor. Late one night, Temi slipped away to Madame Nuru's mansion and informed her of the village's plan. Madame Nuru listened in silence, her face unreadable, her gaze fixed on Temi. But when he had finished, she smiled, a cold, dangerous smile that sent a chill down his spine. She promised him gold and a place of power if he remained loyal to her, and kept her informed of the villagers' plans. The next morning, rumors began to spread. Somehow, Madame Nuru had already heard of the villagers' intentions. She sent messages to the village youth, offering them money and promises of influence if they remained loyal to her and abandoned Kofi's plan. Some of the younger men were swayed by her promises, and a divide began to grow within the group. But Kofi stood firm. He tried to reason with the youth, reminding them of their duty to their families and their village. Some listened, others turned away, seduced by Madame Nuru's wealth. Kofi knew that his own life was now in danger. Madame Nuru's loyalists began to shadow him, watching his every move, and he suspected Temi of betrayal. As tensions grew, the village elders called for a final meeting to decide their next move. They could no longer trust everyone, and Kofi knew they had to act quickly before Madame Nuru could turn more people against them. They decided to gather only the most trusted men and launch a surprise attack on her mansion at dawn. But Madame Nuru was prepared. She waited in the shadows of her grand home, her doll close at hand, her ancient magic ready to defend her. As dawn approached, Kofi and his loyal companions moved silently through the forest, the weight of their mission pressing on them. They knew they faced great danger, but they had no choice. Madame Nuru's reign of terror had to end. As they approached the mansion, a figure stepped out from the shadows, Temi, with a mocking smile. He called out, warning Madame Nuru of their arrival. Before Kofi could react, the mansion doors swung open, and Madame Nuru's voice echoed through the air, chanting incantations that sent waves of dark energy toward the men. The battle was fierce, the air thick with shadows and cries. Madame Nuru's magic was powerful, her anger fierce, but Kofi held the charm that had protected him before, its light shielding him and his friends. With a final cry, Kofi lunged toward the doll, smashing it to the ground. The room shook, and a chilling wail filled the air as the trapped souls were freed. In a final burst of energy, Madame Nuru vanished into the darkness, leaving nothing but her empty mansion behind. After Madame Nuru's disappearance, the village was left in an uneasy silence. The remaining group of villagers stood in the rubble of her mansion, unsure if she was truly gone or if she would return. As they began to disperse, wondering how long their peace would last, one of the younger men, Adisa, quickly raised his voice. "I know where Madame Nuru's private house is," he said, his voice shaky but firm. "I worked for her once, long ago. I never thought she was anything more than a rich, mysterious woman until I saw things I can't forget." Kofi's eyes widened, and he knew they had one last chance to put an end to Madame Nuru's terror. He also understood that this would be more than any of them could face alone. Madame Nuru was a sorceress tied to dark, ancient powers, and if she were hiding somewhere with her magic and fury intact, they would need help. "Adisa, take us there," Kofi said, his face resolute. "But we cannot face her alone. We need someone who knows how to fight powers as dark as hers." The villagers murmured in agreement, and they all knew who could help: Baba Safu, the greatest herbalist in the land. Known for his wisdom, strength, and mastery of spiritual forces, Baba Safu was respected and feared even beyond their village. He had once helped defend the land against evil spirits and monsters in ages past, though no one had dared to approach him for years. The small group made their way through the forest to Baba Safu's secluded hut, where the scent of herbs and incense filled the air. Kofi explained their situation, describing Madame Nuru's powers, her cursed doll, and the souls of the men she had trapped over the years. Baba Safu listened in silence, his eyes sharp and intense. "For the village, and for the spirits of those who have been lost, I will help you," Baba Safu said at last. He gathered sacred weapons and a collection of charms from his shelves, each imbued with protective power. He handed Kofi and the others amulets made from rare herbs and stones. "These will guard you from her spells, but be warned, she is connected to forces older and more dangerous than you know." With Baba Safu leading them, the group traveled through the night to reach Madame Nuru's hidden house. When they arrived, they found a towering stone building, hidden by the twisted roots of an ancient baobab tree. The air was thick with an unnatural darkness, and the house seemed to pulse with an evil presence. Baba Safu stopped at the threshold, his face darkening. "This is not a small battle," he warned them. "Madame Nuru serves a demon, a powerful one, who grants her both power and riches. To enter, we must break the barrier she has placed around the house. But it comes at a cost. One of us must sacrifice their life as the key to unlock this door." Silence fell over the group. They looked at each other, fear evident in their eyes. But then Kofi stepped forward, his face calm and determined. "I will do it," he said, his voice unwavering. "If Madame Nuru escapes, she will come for me and everyone I love. I cannot allow that. This is the only way." Before anyone could protest, Kofi moved to the door, placing his hand on its rough surface. As he touched it, a cold energy surged through him, draining his strength. His body went still, his spirit leaving him as he fell to the ground at the entrance, lifeless. But in his sacrifice, the barrier was broken, and the door creaked open. Baba Safu led the remaining group inside, his eyes scanning every corner for danger. The air grew colder as they ventured deeper, and shadows seemed to move and twist around them. They could feel Madame Nuru's presence, lurking in the darkness, watching them with a furious, burning hatred. Suddenly, Madame Nuru appeared, her eyes blazing, her hands crackling with dark energy. Behind her, grotesque demons slithered and crawled, their eyes filled with malevolent hunger. The battle began, with Baba Safu chanting ancient spells, his amulets glowing as they warded off her attacks. The villagers fought bravely, swinging the weapons Baba Safu had blessed, striking down demons that lunged toward them. Madame Nuru's magic was strong, and with every strike against her, she fought back twice as hard. But Baba Safu was relentless, matching her spells with his own, weakening her defenses as the villagers fought off her demonic minions. As the battle raged, it became clear that Madame Nuru was losing ground, her powers dimming, her fury turning to desperation. In a last attempt to escape, Madame Nuru turned toward the door, intending to flee. But as she reached it, she froze. Standing before her, like a spectral guard, was Kofi's ghost, his spirit bound to the entrance as the key. Kofi's ghostly form blocked her path, his face filled with determination even in death. Madame Nuru screamed, clawing at him, but his spirit remained steadfast, holding her back. The villagers seized their chance. With one final strike, Baba Safu unleashed a spell that severed her power, weakening her beyond recovery. The villagers captured her, binding her hands and dragging her back to the village, where they gathered at the center of the town. The people of the village watched in silence as they brought Madame Nuru forward. They had waited years for justice, for peace, and now, under the watchful eyes of the villagers, Madame Nuru met her fate. Baba Safu raised a ceremonial blade, beheading her in the village square, ensuring her evil would haunt them no more. With the battle over, Baba Safu turned his attention to Kofi's lifeless body at the door of Madame Nuru's house. Using his herbs and chants, he worked tirelessly to call Kofi's spirit back. Hours passed, but finally, Kofi's eyes opened, life returning to his body. The village rejoiced, lifting him up, grateful for his courage and sacrifice. Kofi's voice trembled as he stood before the village elders and the crowd that had gathered around him. His face was solemn, his eyes distant, remembering the pain that had driven him to seek justice. He had never been one for speeches, but today, he had to speak, to share why he had vowed to bring Madame Nuru down. "I have no mother or father," Kofi began, his voice low but clear. "But I have a twin sister, Amora, who is my only family. She's my other half, my light. Growing up, we had nothing but each other, and we held on tight, even through the worst times. She was my reason to be strong, to find hope." The villagers listened quietly. They knew Kofi's story but had never heard him speak of his sister with such raw emotion. "Amora's happiness was everything to me, so when she found love, I was overjoyed. She married a good man, a kind, hard-working mechanic named Tunde. He had little money, but he was honest and filled their home with laughter and warmth. Together, they built a life, simple but full of love, even when there wasn't much food or comfort. Amora was happy, and because of that, I was happy too." Kofi paused, his jaw tightening. But then Madame Nuru entered their lives. He glanced at the villagers, seeing the recognition in their faces. Everyone knew Madame Nuru and her power in the town. He knew what he was up against, but he continued, his voice filled with the strength of his resolve. Tunde was a mechanic, one of the best in the village. Madame Nuru noticed this and made him her personal mechanic, asking him to come often to her mansion to repair her car. At first, it seemed like a blessing. Tunde was earning more, and he could provide a little extra for his family. But soon, he confided in Amora that Madame Nuru wasn't only interested in his work. The crowd murmured in surprise, some looking uncomfortable, others angry. They knew Madame Nuru's influence reached far, but this revelation was unsettling. He told Amora that Madame Nuru offered him money to come and keep her company. He refused every time, though she was persistent. Amora, worried for his safety, begged him to stop working for her. But Tunde reassured her, saying, "My love, you don't have to worry. I will only do my job and collect my money. I don't want anything else from her." Kofi's voice cracked as he recounted his sister's pleas, how she had tried so hard to protect her husband from Madame Nuru's grasp. But he was a good man, a loyal husband. He believed he could handle her. He thought he was strong enough to refuse her. Kofi clenched his fists, his voice hardening as the memory came flooding back. Then one night, late, Madame Nuru called Tunde, claiming her car had broken down on the road. Amora tried to stop him, begged him not to go, but he felt it was his duty. He kissed her goodbye and promised he'd be back soon. A hush fell over the crowd. Kofi's face was etched with pain as he continued. But Tunde never returned. Hours passed, then days, and Amora was left alone, her heart breaking, not knowing what had happened to her husband. Desperate and terrified, she went to Madame Nuru's mansion to confront her. She demanded to know where Tunde was, her voice choked with grief. But Madame Nuru, she just laughed. She told Amora to go and look for her husband elsewhere, as if he were a stray dog that had wandered off. Kofi's eyes filled with rage, his voice trembling as he remembered the moment Amora had come to him, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. She came to me that night, broken, with tears streaming down her face. She told me everything, every humiliation, every fear. She clung to me, her voice filled with pain as she asked, "Kofi, where is he? How could she do this?" He looked up, his gaze fierce as he spoke to the villagers. In that moment, I knew I had to bring Madame Nuru down. She took Tunde, the only joy my sister had known, and destroyed him as if he meant nothing. But I had no proof, no power to confront her on my own. Madame Nuru's influence ran deep, her wealth and dark magic protecting her. So I began to watch her, to monitor her movements, to gather anything I could use against her. Kofi's voice filled with a steady resolve. For months, I followed her, planning, waiting for the right moment to act. I knew that if I didn't stop her, she would do this to someone else, hurt another family the way she had hurt mine. Amora's tears, her broken heart, they fueled my determination. I vowed that I would see Madame Nuru brought to justice, not only for Tunde but for every life she had stolen, every soul she had crushed. The villagers looked at Kofi, many with tears in their eyes, moved by his story. They understood now why he had fought so hard, why he had risked everything to stand against Madame Nuru. It was not just vengeance, it was love, a fierce, protective love for his sister, the only family he had. The crowd's silence turned into murmurs of support, voices rising as one. They would stand by Kofi, for they too had lost loved ones to Madame Nuru's evil. And from that day, the village vowed never to let such darkness thrive in their midst again, united by Kofi's courage and his love for his sister. Kofi glanced toward his twin sister, who stood in the crowd, her face a mixture of pride and grief. She nodded at him, a silent thank you, as he took a deep breath, knowing that the battle they had fought was a victory for her, for Tunde, and for every soul that had been lost. Kofi returned home a hero, and the village was free from Madame Nuru's curse. The people celebrated, knowing their loved ones' souls had finally been set free. And from that day on, the village remembered Kofi and Baba Safu, honoring them as the ones who had restored peace and light to their land.
I hope you enjoy the Parpin story and learn some valuable lessons from it. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel and turn on the notification bell for more videos.